Hi everyone, my name is Steph, this is the Novelty Corner and welcome back to my channel. Today I have a Books Beside My Bed video where I wrap up the last 7 days worth of reading. I am not in my usual filming spot for this video again, for reasons. Anyway, we're here to talk about books, we're here to talk about the wrap up. This was the second week of the mid-year holidays for me, so I have read a lot of things. I would advise you to get a drink and get comfy because there's like 19 things to talk about. I received 2 books from Scribble Kids Books and I absolutely love these. I only got them yesterday and I read them straight away and just loved them. The first one is a picture book called Spiro by Anna McGregor. Now, I think, is this one out yet? So this one was published at the start of July. It is the story of a spider who is trying to, weave a web and catch some dinner, except its web keeps getting broken by things and its dinner keeps escaping. And it is super fun. I love this front cover. I love the foiling on it and I love the bright pops of pink. It was just utterly adorable. And the back, the blurb has Spiro's formula for spidery success: 11% hunger to succeed, or actual hunger, 34% trying again and again and again, 53 giving it another shot, 2% luck, and a whole lot of spider silk. So it is a really gorgeous book. I thoroughly enjoyed reading that one. I hadn't heard of it. Both of these were sent to me unsolicited, so it was just, really fun to get them. The second book that they sent me was Magic Counting by Nabeel and illustrated by TT Garcia. This one is all about exploring the world of numbers through shapes and patterns around us. So this is not quite a board book. It does have thicker cardboardy pages and it is a counting book, but it's not a counting book for babies because I absolutely adored this. You have your number, you have a visual representation of the number, something in our world that we have 2 of, for example, like the sun and the moon, but then you open it up and there are more representations of 2 from around the world, from different cultures, from maths and the sciences, and it is just thoroughly engrossing to read about all of them. Like, nothing in there was brand new to me, but just seeing it put together in this format was wonderful. So a huge thank you to Scribble for sending these to me. I love them. I really do. Then there is Ella and the Amazing Frog Orchestra by Cassy, Polimeni and illustrated by Heike Breeze. This one was sent to me by the University of Western Australia Press. It is a junior fiction title, which means it's for children aged 5 to 8 roughly. You can go up a little bit. I do have a separate video for this one on my kids channel already, but this one is about 8-year-old Ella who has just moved house with her family. She's a little bit put out by this because obviously she has to make new friends. She has to get used to a new environment. She's not really happy about the situation. And when she finally gets the chance to go out and explore in her backyard, she finds this frog pond sort of bordering between her and the neighbor's property. And she just becomes enamored. And when she gets to school, she finds out they are working on frog preservation, protecting the local wildlife and making sure that they have habitats that they can come back to. And then she also discovers that the neighbors are renovating and suddenly the frog pond is disturbed and the frogs start to disappear because their home is, being affected. And so Ella and her family set about creating a new habitat to coax the frogs back. And it's just gorgeous because it is all about preservation of habitats, environmentalism, connecting with family, friendship, kindness, all of those wonderful things in this tiny little package. There's lots of big illustrations. The text is a good size. I want more books like this length, with stories this great. This is the first book in a series, so I cannot wait to read more about Ella and her adventures. I think there's going to be 4 books in the series, and I'm excited. For those who are interested, there is How to Build a Frog Pond in Your Backyard guide at the back of the book. So thank you again to UWA Press. That was a really enjoyable read as well. All right, then getting into everything else that I read this week, both for the Australian readathon and just things that I felt like picking up. I did a lot of audiobooks and a lot of short stories this week, as well as things that I've been meaning to pick up for ages. The first thing that I was listening to was The First Astronomers by Duane Hamacher, I think, who is a US astrophysicist working in Melbourne. I think he might work for the University, he might be at the University of Melbourne, I can't remember. But he originally came out here because he wanted to find out more about what our Indigenous people knew about astronomy. And so he has spent a lot of time with Aboriginal communities and elders talking about their knowledge of astronomy, learning those stories, learning the culture and the significance of the stars to Indigenous stories and to Indigenous culture. And then he has put together this book. It is a science book, but it is so much more than that. There are really wonderful cultural stories and information that I had no idea about. While he is the author of it, he also credits the elders who worked alongside him as co-authors of the book. So it is a really, really wonderful read if you are at all interested in astronomy and at all interested in Australian history and in particular First Nations culture. The audiobook for this was great, but I would like to have a physical copy of this book because I enjoyed it that much. I also read our group book When Things Happen Together by Jordan Clayden-Lewis. This is for the Australian readathon. This is a queer story by an Australian author set in Australia. The first part of the book does take place in a coastal setting. There is also red on the cover. It is about two men who are in Australia from overseas. I think one is Irish and one is English, maybe. And they meet and they fall in love, and their lives are complex and complicated, and the relationship faces quite a lot of difficulty. They don't stay in Australia by the end of the book. They do go back home. They are traveling around Australia through the book, which is nice. And to me, this read very much like a fiction book with a romance in it, as opposed to a romance book, a straight romance book, because one of the characters is dealing with the trauma of being in an abusive relationship in the past, and so does struggle to connect at times and needs more support than he can get out of the relationship at this time. But it was a really interesting read. It did feel and read like a debut book, but it was also a very fast-paced read as well. So I'm really glad that I gave this one a shot, and I do have Jordan Clayden-Lewis's most recent book as well on my TBR, so I will get to that at some point. Then I also listened to another audiobook called Australiana by Yumna Kassab, and this one is probably more of a litfic kind of title, and because I was listening to it as an audiobook, I'm not quite sure how it's laid out as a physical book, but what I gathered from listening to the story is that each chapter or each section of the book is told from the perspective of a member of a small town in Australia. So we start off with the perspective and the story of one character, and I think it was might have been the wife as part of a couple. The next chapter you kind of jump in to her husband's perspective as their stories intersect, and then his story intersects with another member of the community, and then so on and so forth. So each chapter you get is a different member of the community. You're never in the same person's head more than once. And it kind of highlights the complexities of small town life, particularly in Australia, particularly during drought season in remote communities. And there are so many content warnings. It's a litfic. Consider content warnings for everything, because you have everything from people unaliving themselves to murder to arson to cheating to all of the things that happen when you have a large group of people in a community and the different experiences that they have. It is 100% not my usual kind of reading, but it was an audiobook that I got through Libby by an Australian author, set in Australia, red on the cover. So I gave it a shot, and it was a really interesting experience. Said, not my usual genre, maybe not something I'm going to reach for again anytime soon, but still a really very interesting kind of book in the way that it was told. Then I read Hit 'Em Hard by Kat Mizera, which is the third book in the Bang Brothers series. This is not an Australian author. This is a hockey romance, and it is the third book in an interconnected series of standalones by different authors writing in the shared universe around a group of brothers and a sister who are all involved in the hockey world in some capacity. All of them feature their mother, who is trying to matchmake them because she wants her children to be happy. And in this case, we have Bailey and Jensen. Bailey is an actress who was involved in a car accident after her fiance at the time caused the car accident. And we learn very, very quickly in this book that he is not a nice guy, that he severely gaslights her and is physically and mentally abusive of her. And they get into a fight, and then the car that they're in has an accident. We meet her again later, I think it's about a year or two later, and she has a permanent limp. She's living with scars and chronic pain, and she's kind of afraid to continue to explore treatment options to manage her pain because of the experience she's been through getting up to this point. And so she now basically doesn't go out anywhere. She stays at home. She keeps to herself. She doesn't want people to see her because she's worried about, the typecasting in Hollywood and what people will say about her. And so she spends a lot of time online gaming, and she's sort of the leader of a guild, and that's where she meets Jensen, and she doesn't realize that he is an NHL hockey player. And the two of them get along great. And then while they're talking and they've become friends, there are little bits of information that are hinted at. And one day when Jensen is out, he realizes that he has seen her in person. He doesn't say anything at the time, and he doesn't try to get more information out of her, but he's trying to think about, well, do I tell her that I think I've seen her or not? Which is a different take on sort of this trope that I've seen. I mean, it's in a lot of books, but it was nice that it was actually more considerate. And he does tell her that he thinks he's seen her, and she obviously freaks out and thinks that he's stalking her. Fair enough. And takes her time before responding to that. And I liked that exploration of that trope. Eventually they agree to meet again in person, and this time actually talk to one another, but they go on a chaperone date. He takes his mum and she takes her two best friends, and they go and have a group dinner. I love that. That is adorable. And then the two of them begin to explore whether they want to pursue a relationship, which is complicated because he is famous, she is famous, and she's trying to stay out of the spotlight. And so they have to decide how that's going to work for their relationship. Jensen is an absolute cinnamon roll. And one thing I will say is just to, be mindful for yourself. When Bailey talks about herself, her injuries and her pain and how she manages that, there is some ableist language in there that she's using to define herself. For Jensen, that doesn't enter his mind. He's just enamored with her. But that she does have some of that negative self-talk because she's, still very early in her journey and processing what has happened to her. So be aware of that. There's also an earthquake in here because it's set in LA. So just be mindful. Then I read Eden by Nyssa, Kathryn, which is the second book in the Project Armor series. This one I didn't enjoy as much as the first book, which is disappointing because I was kind of excited about this story. It is the second chance romance between Eden, who is a former SEAL who was genetically enhanced through Project Armor and is now kind of a super soldier in terms of reflexes and abilities, and Shyla, who was a nurse for the program but wasn't actually involved in it. She actually found out what was going on and was the whistleblower for the whole project before she had a chance to even tell Eden that, one, she knew, and two, that she was the one who was leaking information to the authorities. She is found out and is shot and then kind of disappears. And so Eden is rather cranky because he thinks that she was in on it, and they have this chance meeting and they reconnect and they have to try and work out, what do they want to do with their relationship. And I felt like the dynamics in this one were off. I wasn't thrilled with the way that Eden treated Shyla. And yes, she was keeping secrets, but she doesn't owe him anything in my mind, and he did not grovel enough. So that was a little bit frustrating, but I'm still interested in the rest of the series because I enjoyed the first book, and I just think this one had dynamics that were not my favorite. I also read a short story called The Lover by Silvia Morena-Garcia. It's my first book by her, and I really, really enjoyed this one. It is about Judith, who is one of a pair of sisters, and she has lived her life basically by her sister's whims. It's sort of this very atmospheric small town, I can't quite place it, kind of fantasy-ish world. And she has had a dream that her lover will walk out of the woods. And at the start of the book, someone does come out of the woods, but he marries her sister. And then later on, a second man comes out of the woods and he looks like a vagrant, and she's not quite sure what to make of him. She then ends up having an affair with her brother-in-law. He's horrible, but this other figure is there, and there may or may not be something paranormal-ish about this other figure. Anyway, it's a short story. It's very atmospheric. It's kind of paranormal horror, and I had a great time with it. Then I read The Visitors by Jane Harrison. This one I listened to on audio, but I do have the book. And this is a First Nations story, and it's kind of a imagining about the meeting of the Indigenous elders when the First Fleet arrives on the continent that is now known as Australia. And it is 6 elders plus a representative of a 7th elder sitting around having a conversation about whether or not to greet and welcome these newcomers coming in these strange boats off the ocean to the land. And it's very much politics, and it was just a fascinating read. Originally it was written as a play and it has then been adapted to a novel form, and yeah, it's very interesting. And then of course it looks at the implications of what happens from welcoming strangers into your land, strangers who don't know how to care for it and who don't have the same connection to it that you and your people do. And yeah, it's a very thought-provoking read. Obviously, it fits the First Nations prompt, set in Australia. There are coastal settings in here. Highly recommend it. I also read Jack Charles' Born Again Blackfella by Jack Charles. This was another audiobook that I got out from Libby, and it is his autobiography of his life. And I didn't know all that much about Jack Charles until I was listening to it, and it was a very fascinating read. So Jack Charles is an Indigenous man who was part of the stolen generation. So he was taken from his mum, and he grew up in sort of group home care and suffered a lot through there, a lot of abuse, SA. He has been in and out of the justice system his entire life. He's been incarcerated many times. He's fairly well respected. He became an actor, but has been in and out of prison throughout that period. He had a substance abuse issue, and again was continuing to work the whole way through his life while dealing with that. And it was just really interesting to learn about how he reconnected with his culture, how he eventually found his mum and found his siblings, the things that he has endured and sort of the trauma that he's faced, but also how he has continued to move forward in the face of those things as well. Really, really interesting read. And he he narrates the audio. I also read Only in Forever by Chloe Liese, which is the 7th and final book in the Bergman Brothers series, and this one is following Viggo, who is our hopeless romantic of the Bergman Brothers series. He is the one who has helped everyone to understand and, you know, internalize their own feelings throughout the entire series, and suddenly it's his turn and he is feeling pressure because he hasn't been able to find his person, and he's the one who believes in true love, and he reads romance books. He opens a romance bookstore and he hasn't found his person. And then Tallulah Clark comes back into his life. Tallulah is the sister of a close friend of his sister's. They went to college together for a brief time and they haven't seen each other for a while, but he had the biggest crush on her, and suddenly she's back in his life. And her life has kind of been upended. She was in a no strings attached relationship that has not ended well. She's a thriller author who is struggling with her second book, and the two of them come up with this mutually beneficial arrangement. She needs a place to stay and some help with the shop that he's opening, and she needs some feedback on how to ensure that the relationship in her book feels authentic. And so he offers to give her some feedback and some critique, and she offers to help him with the shop. And so they have this forced proximity situation, and it was really lovely. Like, it was nice to see Viggo get his book. If you like books, if you like animals, if you just like gorgeous found family vibes, the Bergman Brothers series is for you. This one does feature ADHD representation. Viggo is neurodiverse and Tallulah has type 1 diabetes. I also reread All Roads Lead Here by Mariana Zapata. This was one of my annotation project books, and I'm really glad that I read it because I got all the warm fuzzy feelings from it. This one is about Aurora, whose life is kind of upended, and she decides to go sort of rediscover some of her past and goes back to a small town where she and her mother lived while she was growing up. Her mother went missing while hiking, and Aurora has decided that what she wants to do is kind of follow in her mother's footsteps and rediscover her connection to her mother through completing some of the hikes that she did complete and, you know, had recorded in a journal. And she rents this small apartment over a garage. And when she gets there, she finds out that the apartment has been rented by the son of the owner, and the owner didn't know about it. And Rhodes is quite grumpy. He is a park ranger, I can't remember, park warden, I don't know what the term is. Anyway, he reluctantly agrees to let her stay, and slowly Aurora and Rhodes and his son become closer and they get to know one another, and there is a thawing between them. But it is Mariana Zapata, so 1, it is incredibly slow burn and long. 2, the hero is a grump who does not communicate effectively. And you kind of figure out why that is as you read through the story. And I kind of like the dynamic, particularly the family dynamic between Rhodes, his son, and his son's other parents in this book. So it is one of the few Mariana Zapata books that I have read, but I definitely enjoyed this one. All right, and then the last 7 things that I read were all short stories, part of the Into Shadows Amazon short story collections. So again, this is a series that is written by multiple authors around a common theme. You don't have to read them in order, you can read them in any order. And the titles include The Garden by Tommy Champion-Adeyemi, The 6 Deaths of the Saint by Alix Harrow, Persephone by Lev Grossman, What the Dead Know by Nghi, Undercover by Tamsin Muir, The Candles Are Burning by Victoria Henry, and Out of the Mirror Darkness by Garth Nix. As with all short stories and all things in a series, not everything is created equal, and I certainly had my favourites in it. The Garden by Tommy Adeyemi I actually really enjoyed this one. It is about a woman whose mother went missing while searching for this mythological magical garden. And so she decides to go in search of it as well. And she is following her mother's journal, and she has a local guide, and all she knows is that to enter the garden, there is a cost, and the cost is your soul and whatever that means to you. So it's a really interesting kind of story. I should say all of these short stories have a theme around forbidden knowledge. The 6 Deaths of the Saint by Alix Harrow was the first story I actually read in this series because I've read Alix Harrow before, and I also really enjoyed this one. This one is about a young woman who is selected by a prince to become his champion, and she continues to rise through the ranks, and as she wins battles, she helps him to elevate his position as well. And she is guided by the Saint of War, and there is a connectedness between the two of them, and you don't learn that straight away. You kind of have to get into the story, and it is a really interesting, and it's a really interesting fantasy story, but it is quite violent. It is very bloody, so just be aware of that. Persephone by Lev Grossman, who I've not read for the longest time, and this one was my least favorite. Persephone is in high school, and she doesn't fit in at all, and she is bullied by some of the other students, and one day while she is in class, something goes wrong and she is suddenly picked up by authorities and taken to another location. I think the reason this one didn't resonate with me as much, all of these are kind of open-ended stories, but this one, it felt like too much was open-ended. You didn't really get any resolution or closure or satisfaction from the ending. What the Dead Know by Nevo was another one that I really liked. This one is about two traveling performers who one claims to be a medium, but is obviously putting on a performance. And the two of them end up at this girls' boarding school that are trying to fundraise money for the school. And she and her partner are there to talk to the spirits of the dead. Now, as I said, it's all a performance until it's not. And we find out that there has been a murder that has taken place on the property and the murderer might still be there. My favorite story in this collection was Undercover by Tamsin Muir, which this was one of the longer ones. So the shortest story was about 30 pages. This one was 59 pages, I think. And this one is another fantasy horror story. And we have Detective Star, who is undercover in sort of a criminal mob ring. And she's there to ingratiate herself with the widower, who is the leader. And the widower has a performer amongst her troupe who is a ghoul and is the biggest draw card. Now, ghouls in this world are obviously quite dangerous. Star has been sent in to assess what level of ghoul they are dealing with and to then communicate that with her boss. And if it's a really dangerous sentient ghoul, then they're obviously going to come in and level the place. We discover that there is a connection between the widower, the ghoul, and also Star. And this one I loved. One, it was creepy and gross, which if it's a horror, I want those elements, right? But also because there is a twist. And I started to see it coming just before it's revealed, which is the best time to see it. I don't want to see it too far out, where not everyone is who they say they are. I really enjoyed this one. If you're looking for something creepy to read, particularly maybe later in the year when it comes around to October, keep this one on your radar. Then there is The Candles Are Burning by Victoria Henry. This one is about a woman whose husband has died and an undertaker who has made a deal with death. And that's all I'm going to say about that one. And then the final story was Out of the Mirror Darkness by Garth Nix. So this one would count for the Australian readathon because Garth Nix is Australian. And this one is about a man who has been hired as a fixer who works on a movie studio set. And they have a film currently in production. It's got a big budget. And then one of the star actresses and one of the star animals on the show suddenly are unwell. And not only that, they basically fall asleep and they won't wake up. And so he begins to investigate what has happened between them, and it turns out that maybe there might be a prop on set that was bought because it looked authentic, and maybe it's real, and maybe there is something living in the mirror. So yes, I had fun exploring this little collection. It's very outside my comfort zone, but I got some really good books out of it. I mean, I haven't read Tamsin Muir before. I know she writes the Gideon the Night series and all of that, but I really like that short story. So do with that what you will. So yes, this was definitely one of my most eclectic reading weeks that I've had in a very long time. I mean, I'm generally eclectic anyway, but this is very eclectic. But it was really interesting and really fun. So I'm glad that I read some of these books. So yeah, I'll leave everything listed down below. So if you want to find out more information, you can. Otherwise, feel free to chat to me about any of them in the comments if you'd like to. Otherwise, you can let me know something that you have read in the last week, or if you want to let me know that you're here but you don't want to leave a comment, you can leave a book stack emoji down below. I hope that wherever you're on the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I'll see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye everyone.